Good afternoon, and welcome to the Colorado edition of our webinar series exploring state findings from American Farmland Trust recently released Farms Under Threat, Choosing an Abundant Future. Before we get started, let me run through some quick logistics, and you can see here our agenda for the hour together. First, everyone has been muted, so no need to worry about that. And you see that we have time for questions and comments toward the end. We invite you to ask questions and to make comments, and to do that, look at your control panel on the right-hand side. At the very top, you see an oblong orange box with an arrow in it that shrinks and reopens the control panel. When we get into the website and the maps, you may find it easier to close the control panel so that you can see the maps all the way, because otherwise sometimes you can't. But if you want to ask a question, go down to that questions line, and on the far right hand side you see a box with a little arrow coming out of it. Click on that box, that'll pop the questions out. You can type your question in and we will get to it toward the end. Also in the control panel, you can see that there are two handouts. So if you click on that, that will take you to a PDF of the full Farms Under Threat report, and it will also take you to a two-page summary for Colorado specifically, and we will talk about that later in the webinar. Lastly, we are recording this webinar, and we'll send all of you a copy of the recording as well as everybody who is registered. So please feel free to share it widely and let people know about it, because we hope to reach as many people as we can with this information. And so with that, let me introduce myself and my co-host. I'm Chris Coffin. I direct American Farmland Trust's National Agricultural Land Network. The network is an information and peer learning network that we created a couple of years ago to really build the capacity around the country of folks, particularly professionals, but really anybody who is interested in digging in to figure out how do we really save farmland. And that is thinking about planning and zoning tools all the way to permanent agricultural land protection. So it is a free network. We hope folks will think about joining in, and we'll talk a little bit more about it at the end. I'm also AFT's Senior Policy Advisor, and I specialize in farmland protection, land access, farm transfer and succession, and ag viability. Co-hosting with me is Kara Hecker. It was great to have Kara here. Kara is AFT's Resilient Agriculture West Advisor. Kara works across regional and national programs to help develop and execute AFT's strategy for increasing resilience for agriculture in the Western United States. So Kara is also going to introduce our very special guest, but before we go there, let me just take a minute to talk about American Farmland Trust for those of you who don't really know much about us. We are a national nonprofit membership organization founded in 1980. Some know us best by our bumper sticker, "No Farms, No Food," but I like the bumper sticker we had before this one, which said, "It's not farmland without farmers," and I think that same would be true. It's not ranch land without ranchers. We understand agriculture, and we take a holistic approach to it. Our national initiatives, our regional programming focus not just on protecting the agricultural land base, but at looking at those practices that are being used on the land, and as important, thinking about the viability and the profitability of the farmers and ranchers on the land, both those who are there now and those who aspire to be there in the future. Our programs and our research inform our state and federal policy work. We like to say we work from farm fields and kitchen tables all the way to the halls of state capitals and Congress. We have 6 regional offices and a national office headquartered in Washington, D.C. And with that, let me turn it over to Kara.
Thanks, Chris, and thank you all for joining us. We'd like to recognize and thank USDA's Natural Resources Conservation Service for their partnership and financial support of our Farms Under Threat research. Farms Under Threat is AFT's multi-year initiative to document the status of and threats to America's agricultural land base. NRCS has been invaluable to this entire research project, as has our research partner, Conservation Science Partners, For this report, we also collaborated with the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And now I'd like to introduce a very special guest, Jordan Beasley, who's the Deputy Commissioner of External Affairs for the Colorado Department of Agriculture. Jordan oversees the department's overall policy and legislative strategy, including serving as the legislative liaison. Jordan provides oversight and makes recommendations to the commissioner and senior staff on policy matters impacting the department and the larger agricultural community in Colorado. In addition, he oversees the budgetary direction of the department. So welcome to you, Jordan. How are you?
Thank you, I'm good. It's good to be here, and thanks for having me, Cara and Chris.
So we're going to launch right into some questions for you about agriculture in Colorado and the findings. So the first one is, what struck you most about the findings for Colorado in our Farms Under Threat research?
I think there's a couple things that really struck me in looking at the report. The first one is that despite all the efforts that have been undertaken in Colorado at the state and local level over the past couple of decades to protect agricultural lands, in the business as usual case that we look at, there's still a significant loss of agricultural lands, particularly close to our urban centers and our mountain communities. And one of the things about this that is kind of concerning to me is that as we kind of further push agriculture away from our urban centers and our communities, this ends up being a really big challenge for our efforts in educating and connecting our urban populations with rural agriculture in our state. Another point that really got me was that agricultural land in kind of the low density residential areas is 42 times more likely to be converted to urban high density. I think this really shows the challenges that we're facing as a state and a nation integrating development with agricultural land uses.
Great. How do you think the research can be used by folks on this webinar and beyond to help save Colorado's farmland and ranchland?
You know, I think the research that you all have done and with your partners and kind of put together is really helpful in understanding development trends here in Colorado, and will be useful in helping target our policies and conservation efforts to those areas that are more likely to see significant loss of farmland. I also think it shows us that growth policies and practices in our large urban corridors and our mountain resort communities really does have a significant impact on the loss of farmland. I think to many on this call that's not going to be a surprise. However, again, despite kind of the significant gains we've made in Colorado over the past decade, I think this still highlights the tremendous amount of work that's still to be done to protect agricultural lands.
Great, and so the next question kind of builds on that. What steps would you like to see state or local governments or even the federal government take to reduce conversion of agricultural land?
You know, I think we need to take a smart approach to development, one that really supports our growing population while preserving our most agriculturally productive areas and, quite frankly, the lands that attracted people to the state in the first place. However, I also think there are many different forces at play in making it difficult to continue farming and ranching, especially in Colorado. And in order to address conversion of farmland, I think we need to address all of these challenges. And specifically, I think we need to, really look at ensuring that there's a path to land and water access for our beginning farmers and ranchers, so that as a retiring generation, is getting out of farming and ranching, there's an alternative for them to selling to a developer. We also need to be looking at increasing kind of the bottom line for our farmers and ranchers, so that it makes financial sense to stay in agriculture instead of walking away with a one-time check from a developer. With all of these challenges, I don't think there's a silver bullet. And really, it's kind of working holistically and working with all of our partners at every level of government, with landowners, with the private sector, with our nonprofit partners, to address all of these challenges that farmers and ranchers face in order to kind of address the decline in productive agricultural lands. And so I would really like to see, we're doing a great job at collaborating, but I think we need to do a better job at collaborating across all of those areas.
Great, thank you so much. Certainly the issue of water access is really unique to the West as we're baking out here in the Western United States, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later. So thanks so much for sharing your thoughts, and I think you're staying with us for the rest of the session.
Yes, thanks for having me, and yes, I'll be sticking around for the rest of the session.
Great, thanks so much. And now back to you, Chris.
Great, thank you so much, Kara. Thank you so much, Jordan. We are now going to dig into the findings and the methodology. And in order to see the slides and then the maps better, we are going to turn our cameras off so you don't have to see us, and instead you can see the more relevant information. So let's dive right in and talk about, first, let me talk about the first two Farms Under Threat reports. The first one is Farms Under Threat, State of America's Farmland, that was released in 2018, and Farms Under Threat, State of the States, which we released in 2020. These two reports mapped past conversion of agricultural land, looking first from 1992 to 2012, and then from 2001 to 2016. In this report, we are looking forward. We are using that past conversion data to model and predict future conversion of farm and ranch land out to 2040. We started with our Farms Under Threat State of the State analysis of conversion from 2001 to 2016. And as a reminder, that analysis mapped conversion of land to two different types, and we're going to take a moment to talk about those two different types. Here you see the spectrum of types of conversion, and we've talked about them in this report and past reports as two different types: urban and highly developed land, which is the traditional culprit in farmland conversion. It includes residential, industrial, and commercial areas typically found in and around cities and towns. But it also includes rural industrial sites, such as oil and gas infrastructure, warehouses that might be far out of town, solar development, anything that can be identified by satellite remote sensing as built up. Low density residential development, which you see on the right-hand side, has become a more pervasive culprit. And AFT worked with conservation science partners to pioneer an approach to mapping and quantifying the impacts of this type of development on the agricultural land base. These areas range from lower density subdivisions to what you can see on the far right, the larger farmettes and ranchettes. This kind of scattered large lot housing fragments the agricultural land base and makes production harder for the farms and ranches that remain. It's important to note that some agriculture can be found on this low density residential land. And we want to note that some farm parcels, especially those in and around urban centers, can be sustainable and profitable. However, our research has found that once land has been converted to low-density residential land use, it is far more likely to be further converted to urban and highly developed land, putting it out of agriculture entirely. So, starting with our historical data, we projected into the future with a business as usual scenario. Basically, we made a straight line projection using the same annual conversion rate as what we documented historically to predict the level and location of conversion by 2040. We adjusted the model to account for projected population growth or decline. Building off that business as usual scenario, we developed two alternative scenarios, which we'll get to in a minute. In each of the three scenarios, we also mapped the coastal flooding risk that is projected by sea level rise. Once we had our projection of conversion and flooding risk, we quantified the effects of these scenarios in two different ways. We looked first at what was going to be the impact on the type of agricultural land, so cropland or pasture land or rangeland or woodland associated with a farm or ranch. We also looked at the quality of the land that is likely to be converted using an index that we created in our last report, a productivity, versatility, and resiliency index, which we'll talk about in a minute. As with any modeling exercise, there are some caveats. Importantly, we were not able to account for local zoning. Land use regulations are inherently local, and there's no national database to tap into. This means that our maps represent the general pattern and rough amount of conversion that is likely based on those past conversion patterns from 2001 to 2016. They do not reflect what may be allowed or prohibited on the ground through local land use regulations. Importantly, our modeling also does not include the impact of water scarcity and potential fallowing of land because of lack of water. Mapping this impact is very complex and was beyond the scope of our analysis. You'll see when we get to the website, though, that we did include a data overlay from World Resource Institute's Aqueduct, which offers some projections about water availability in the future. So here are the three scenarios we modeled. First, business as usual. Again, that's projecting out using that 2001 to 2016 data, projecting it out to 2040. The second is what we call runaway sprawl. This envisions a scenario where sprawl actually gets worse. We see this trajectory as entirely possible and may already be happening in some places. It's driven by continued housing costs and shortages in both large and small cities, and the likely permanent shift to more remote work opportunities. And that remote work will become even more appealing as rural broadband expands and improves. Lastly, we modeled the future we hope for, better built cities. This scenario envisions successful efforts to reduce the footprint of residential and commercial and industrial development on productive agricultural land. While the scenario still results in the conversion of some land, it envisions a future with vibrant, compact cities and towns and abundant farm and ranch land to meet the needs of the future. So a quick look at the assumptions that went into these three scenarios. For business as usual, again, we used that historic rate, that rate from 2001 to 2016. We adjusted it for population growth, but we only did that in the urban and highly developed land. That's because there's a strong correlation between population growth and urban and highly developed land. For runaway sprawl, we kept the same as business as usual for that urban and high density land, but we assumed a 50% higher rate of conversion through low density residential land use. And that's because that has been the trend of much higher conversion because of that LDR. And then lastly, on the better built cities, we assumed a lower rate of conversion. We assumed a 25% lower rate. That is based on evidence that there are some cities and communities that have been able to grow with a much smaller footprint. So we know that it is possible. And we took a more aggressive approach on the could we reduce the rate of low density residential land use by 50% from the business as usual. So now let's look at each scenario's potential impact. You see here on the left, the gray areas show the 11 million acres of land that was converted just in the first 15 years of this century. That includes just under 235,000 acres in Colorado that were converted. Under business as usual or worse, runaway sprawl, we may see another 18.4 or even 24.4 million acres of farm and ranch land converted or threatened. Conversely, if we make smart choices about where and how we site future development, we can see again that much more compact amount of conversion. And so you may be looking at that 11 million acres and saying, wow, that's still a lot of land lost. Is that really the best case scenario? AFT appreciates that development, including renewable energy development, is necessary, and the need for housing and affordable housing options is acute. So while it may be possible for cities and towns to be even more compact in their growth, we chose what we believed was a realistic scenario. So these next two slides we hope are helpful in showing how Colorado compares to other states. This slide shows projected total acres converted by county. The darker the red or the rust, the more acres are likely to be converted. So here you see a significant amount of that darker color in Colorado. We'll look more closely at this when we get to the website, but there are two counties that make the list of counties in the US at risk of losing the most acres of agricultural land. One is El Paso County with projected ag land conversion of 54,500 acres. The other, with a much smaller agricultural land base, is Douglas County with projected conversion of 45,100 acres. And I just want to say, as I'm saying these, there is information, and what makes this particular version of our Farms Under Threat very helpful, we think, is that we have a lot of county level data. And again, we will talk a little bit more about how you can access that data. So this next slide compares the percent of agricultural land in each county that's projected to be developed. And you see a different pattern here. Obviously, that's more, you see more darker parts on the eastern half of the US because the agricultural land base is smaller and development pressures are high. But even in Colorado, you see here that there's quite a bit of projected conversion as a percent of the total ag land base. Looking now at the impacts to our very best agricultural land. For previous reports, AFT created the first ever index of agricultural land quality that looked at the productivity, versatility, and resiliency of land, or what we called its PVR value. Land over a certain PVR threshold is land AFT considers to be nationally significant, land which is best suited for long-term cultivation and food production. And you can see here in this map a fair bit of it in Colorado. This nationally significant agricultural land represents about 17% of Colorado's land base, ag land base, or 5.6 million acres. What we find in our future projections is that conversion of this land is likely to be higher than conversion of ag land in general, likely because for the very reason this land is productive, it's flat, it's well drained, it's relatively free of rocks. It's also the most easily and inexpensively developed. The loss of this land is especially concerning. This is land that can produce the highest yields of crops and livestock with the least environmental impacts. Our modeling shows that nearly half of the projected conversion from 2016 to 2040 will occur on nationally significant land, even though it represents less than 40% of the country's agricultural land base. The more nationally significant land converted, the more reliant we become on marginal land for food production. And to put this potential loss of 9 million acres of nationally significant land in perspective, total acreage of land in the US devoted to fruit and nut and vegetable production is just 10.4 million acres. And now I'm going to hand it back to Kara, who's going to talk a little bit about solar.
Great, thank you, Chris. One of the other threats we are highlighting with the report is the threat that solar development poses to agricultural land. To be clear, AFT supports renewable energy development. However, we think it's essential that we plan carefully so that our most productive, versatile, and resilient land is not compromised. We also think it's possible for agriculture and solar to coexist in mutually beneficial ways. There's a great local example of this already happening in Colorado in Boulder County at Jack's Solar Garden, which is a family-owned social enterprise which is putting valuable research into the public sphere on co-locating solar panels with agriculture. They are partnering with Sprout City Farms, which enables the cultivation of crops, helping to put food back into the community, while also training young farmers on agrivoltaic techniques. We wanted to be sure to highlight that because it's really a shining example throughout the West. But back to the map. So this map shows the projected acres of utility scale solar photovoltaics, energy generation facilities by state in 2040. This data comes from the decarbonization with electrification scenario of the U.S. Department of Energy's Solar Futures Study. That study estimates there will need to be 7.4 million acres of utility scale solar in place by 2040 to meet federal energy goals. If you're interested in more information about the solar modeling we did as part of this project, our solar technical paper is available through our Farmland Information Center. We'll be sharing that information later. We will also be releasing a solar white paper later this year. The most important takeaway from our modeling is that 83% of the projected solar development by 2040 will be sited on agricultural land, and nearly half of the projected solar will be sited on nationally significant land. We're now going to dive into the data available for Colorado on the interactive website. And for this, we're going to switch gears here, be joined by our colleague, Beth Frazier, who will be our navigator. Thank you, Beth.
Great. Thank you, Beth, and thank you, Kara. So here we are now in the website, and Beth will at some point put into the chat the link to the website so you have it at your fingertips. When you get there, this is the cover page that comes up, talks about what we did, what we found. Essentially, it talks basically what I've just walked through. And so to get out of this, what you do is you just click that little X in the upper right-hand corner. Let's talk about the upper right-hand corner for a minute while we're already focused there, and the other tabs that are up there. That About tab just takes you back to that cover page. Next to that, you'll see a How-To tab. That takes you to a 5-minute video that explains how to use the various data layers in the scenario. Next to that, you see the View Report tab. That takes you directly to our Farmland Information Center. And here there's a wealth of information about farms under threat. So number one, there's the full report, the executive summary. There's a technical report for the report and the modeling and the methodology. There's a solar technical report that looks at our solar mapping and what we found. And down below, you can also see access to the Farms Under Threat State of the States report, where again, you can find more information about how we did our PVR index, as well as past conversion. Lastly, we are making our data available to the public, and that's both the geospatial data layers, but also, as I mentioned before, additional information about counties. So if you don't see your county mentioned in the full report, or you want to have a comparison of all of the counties across the state, feel free to go to this particular page. Again, it's under the Request Data tab. Fill it out, and we will be back in touch with the information you're looking for. So with that now, Beth is going to zoom us into Colorado, and all you do here is you just put your cursor on the state and click on it, and that takes you directly to there. And you see here on the left information about the state as a whole, and on the right about Fremont. I hope I pronounced that right, county. You can tell I am not from Colorado, though I would love to live there. The reason why it ended up on that county in particular was simply because that was where Beth's cursor was when she clicked on Colorado. But you click around the state and you can get to any county you want. So let's look at what information is available on this page. On the left-hand side, you can see this darker color is the projected conversion to urban and highly developed land, and the brighter color is the bright orange is the low density residential conversion. And again, that's statewide data on the left and the county data on the right. And so looking here, you see total conversion projected of being 417,500 acres under business as usual. And when you look at that, the split between urban and highly developed and low density residential for the state as a whole, it looks pretty even between what land is going to be converted to urban and high density versus that low density. When you look over at this county level, you see that much more of the conversion is being fueled by low density residential development. So when looking down, again, looking at the types of land that are projected to be developed. Here you see that it says acres of Colorado's best agricultural land. That is land, again, we've used that PVR index, but this is land that is in the upper half of the state's PVR's values, both for cropland and for rangeland. And you can see that, again, under business as usual, there's the data that suggests that 219,800 acres, or I think that's it's 53%, is likely to be on the more productive ag land in the state. And again, there are numbers for the county, not just for this county, but for all of the counties. And then looking down, you see again the type of agricultural land that is likely to be converted. And again, here you see rangeland is far and away the largest type of land likely to be converted, with cropland behind and then pasture land behind it. A note about the woodland, obviously there's a lot of forested land in Colorado. This isn't saying that only 1,700 acres of woodland in the state is going to be converted. This is woodland that is associated with a farm or a ranch. This was a new modeling that we did in 2020 in the State of the States report, where we were able to associate woodland with farms and ranches, and this assumes that just 1,700 acres of woodland would be converted. Looking down at the bottom, you see again what Jordan mentioned is this likelihood that once land is in low density residential land use, that it is way more likely, and in Colorado's case, it's 42 times more likely to be further converted. So that threat remains that LDR is a sort of interim land use for land that will continue to be further developed. Going back up, let me just show you very quickly the download report. So here, if you look at this blue tab that Beth is pointing on, that takes you to an easily printed, easily downloaded, and easily shared summary about the findings for Colorado. And we hope that folks will indeed share this with policymakers, with neighbors, with county commissioners, with anybody who might have an interest or a need to learn about this type of information. One of the important things that we did here was not just to show that here's the 417,000 plus acres likely to be converted, but what does that mean? What does that translate into in terms of impact on agriculture? We used the 2017 Census of Agriculture to derive these numbers. And you can see here that we estimate that it's the equivalent of losing 1,900 farms and ranches, $86 million in lost farm output, and the potential loss of 3,000 jobs in the agricultural sector. So pretty significant there. The rest of this information, again, is just sort of talking a little bit further about how development choices matter and some of those acreage figures. So again, we hope that you will use this. We hope you will reprint it, that you will find various uses for that summary document. And now Kara and Beth are going to zoom in further to some of the county level mapping to give us a little more sense of what's going on at the county level.
Great, thank you, Chris. So we're actually gonna look at 4 counties. We just added one. We're gonna look at the top 3 hardest hit counties. So we're gonna start first with El Paso County. And so Beth, let's cruise there. And to get us started, can you show the drop-down menu for the 3 modeled scenarios on the left hand of the map? Please select runaway sprawl as our modeled scenario on the left and show better built cities as our scenario in the right. Before we dive in, I'd like to show some of the functionality of the maps and how you can change views. Can you show the audience, Beth, the legend up in the right-hand corner? think we got that there. As our base map is currently in the 2016 land cover view, you can see the different colors that represent the modeled land use scenarios and the land use cover base map, excuse me. Thanks. Now can you show us the various views that they can select in the platform? You can change your base maps by going to the top right corner. And you can select the satellite view. Awesome. Given a bird's eye view of the landscape with selected scenarios stacked on top. With the slider up in the right-hand corner, you can adjust the transparency of the data layer by simply sliding this back and forth. And lastly, you can select the standard view. So this view offers more contrast for the data. So we encourage you to dive in and take a cruise around here. As we have in the downloaded report, El Paso is one of the 3 hardest hit. The next one we're going to go to is Douglas County. Kind of look at what's going on there. Just south of Denver, looking at our runaway sprawl and better built cities scenario. So you can see quite an expansion of low density residential all throughout the edges of the cities and the different freeways and interstates there. Thanks, Beth. Now we're going to go to Larimer. So much further north, kind of on there. And you can see a lot of expansion around Fort Collins and Loveland. Again, kind of in the low density residential arena. And something to mention that I'll bring up later is the challenge in not being able to model water scarcity is definitely going to play a big part in a state like Colorado with increased drought conditions. And so, you know, land lost due to dwindling water supply reliability and groundwater resources obviously is a huge factor that we are aware of in Colorado. The last one I wanted to go to is Broomfield County, because unfortunately Broomfield County is the number one you don't want to be. Although it's a smaller county. Are you there, Beth?
It's tricky.
We'll give you a moment to find it. Yeah, it should be right outside of Denver. I'll keep talking about it though. Although it didn't make the top 3 hardest hit, it actually made number 1 in the country as the nation's number 1 county projected to convert the largest percentage of remaining agricultural land. So although there's less agricultural land in the county than other Colorado counties, the percent of land lost is the highest in the nation. So it's a little trickier to tell with the modeling. Thank you, Beth. It looks like both urban and low density residential development are happening. You could see that kind of build out up north. Could you do the satellite view for us real quick? Maybe that gives us a better idea. It's a little challenging to tell, but as you zoom in, you can kind of see where the expansion is happening, which looks like more in the northern part of the county. But we just wanted to highlight that, given its very unique ranking of number 1. Oh, I see that there. Yeah. Well, thanks for the tour. We hope that everyone will use this tool, zero in on their county and see what the kind of projections are for the scenarios that we have listed out. And so hopefully that provided some insight on how to use the web app. And now I'll be headed back to Chris.
Great. Thank you, Kara. Thank you, Beth. So now that we've talked about the findings, we want to take a few minutes to talk about action and what can each of us do to help choose an abundant future. Our report has policy recommendations in each of these 4 categories and at every level of government. So if you are a county or a municipal official, a state legislator, a state agency employee, a member of Congress or a congressional staffer, we hope that you might find a recommendation in here that you would like to champion. Please let us know if we can provide you with any additional information about any of the policy ideas in the report. And I should say a report cannot be hundreds of pages long, and there are lots of policy ideas. We just barely scratched the surface. So indeed, if folks have any points that they want to make on that front or questions about other policy ideas, please feel free to let us know that as well. If you're a farmer, a rancher, a landowner, a community advocate, you work for a nonprofit in agriculture or conservation or forestry, we encourage you to share and discuss these recommendations with your elected and agency representatives and partners. So I just want to touch on a few of the things that we talk about in the recommendations. In this encourage smart growth category, foundational to smart growth and compact development is good local planning. Comprehensive or master plans can provide the vision and roadmap for land use regulations that promote compact development and minimize development of a community's best farmland. We encourage communities to have comprehensive plans, and we urge folks who care about the future of farm and ranch land to get involved in the development and review of their local or county comprehensive or master plan. We also encourage states to support local comprehensive planning and to have a statewide plan for agricultural land retention and protection. Protecting agricultural land, and here we think of it largely in terms of permanent protection, but again, there are many techniques that are less than permanent. But in terms of thinking about protecting agricultural land, obviously Colorado has done a good job in putting some funding towards farm and ranch land protection. And in terms of federally, Congress will be writing a new farm bill in the next year or two. An important program in that bill is the Agricultural Conservation Easement Program, which helps to fund the purchase of agricultural conservation easements from willing farmers and ranchers and rural landowners. More funding for that program and some changes to the program would help protect more agricultural land in Colorado. We were excited to see an additional $1.4 billion in funding for this program in the Inflation Reduction Act recently enacted. I should also mention the Regional Conservation Partnership Program, or what's known as RCPP, another federal program which can be used to protect farm and ranch land, as well as some forest land, and we think that provides that it also received a significant increase in funding through the Inflation Reduction Act, and we think that holds promise as well. Advancing smart solar siting. State and local governments can incentivize solar development on existing infrastructure and marginal land, as well as incentivize agrivoltaics or dual-use solar development, as Kara mentioned earlier. If solar is located on productive ag land, local governments should ensure that solar development adheres to best practices for the construction, the operation, and the decommissioning of the development to preserve soil health, water resources, and the ability to work the land during and after the life of a project. And then support farmland access. Jordan touched on this a little bit, and I loved his talking about the need for pathways to transition farm and ranch land to the next generation. It was exciting when we were talking right before the webinar began, and he was talking a little bit about the Colorado Agricultural Futures Loan Program. So Colorado is doing things to support this farmland access. So we would say simply keep going. You're doing good work. And it's important to recognize that some of this work, particularly the making connections between existing landowners and those farm and ranch seekers who aspire to get onto land or to be able to afford land. It's time-intensive work, it's resource-intensive work, and the more that state and local governments can help to support this type of work, either directly or through nonprofit organizations or through extension services, that is enormously helpful. So with that, let me turn it back to Kara, who's going to talk a little bit more about planning for agriculture and what local communities can do to protect their agricultural land.
Thank you so much, Chris. As Chris said, there are key strategies that AFT recommends as best practices that have been taken from other places across the nation. There's certainly places in Colorado where planning for ag is being done right. Community planning is critically important to smart growth. As part of this planning, AFT encourages communities to plan proactively for agriculture. This involves these 4 basic principles. So, inventorying your resources, whether that be your productive, versatile, and resilient soils, riparian corridors, groundwater recharge areas, or view sheds. It's really important to have a good handle on what you have. Engaging farmers and ranchers is, as many of you know, critical in the process for future planning for agriculture. We need to engage farmers in the public process by asking them what their vision is for the future and getting their buy-in. Incorporating agriculture and other natural resources into community plans, which can be done through comprehensive plans to inform the use of tools to protect these resources. I wanted to expand a little bit on this because what's critically important, as many of you know, is in drought-stricken states like Colorado, where we're dealing with limited water resources and a lot of pressure and competition for water, it's really important that we look at the intersection of our most productive, resilient, and versatile farmland and our future water supply reliability, and not look at those in siloed ways, and look at those 2 things together when we make our planning decisions of what is most important land to protect. So I wanted to underscore that. And building off that, I wanted to talk just a little bit about AFT's work in the Western United States with our Resilient Agriculture West initiative, which develops landscape scale strategies to increase resilience for agriculture, and how we work with local governments on local planning for ag is a really key part of our programming. Our work is building off of our California San Joaquin land and water strategy, which is driving major research and corresponding land protection, conservation practice adoption to increase agricultural's resilience to a changing climate and strained water resources. Why I bring this up is, excuse me, part of this project has included the development of a conservation decision-making tool or project prioritization tool for local planners. And that tool is used to increase the adoption of water infiltration practices, improve groundwater recharge, and protect agricultural land. And we are expanding that all throughout the state of California right now. And we're very much interested in looking to expand that tool to other drought-stricken Western states to provide a resource for ag land protection practitioners and local planners in helping them make more informed land use and farmland protection decisions. So we'll be providing more information on that in our follow-up. And with that, I think we're going to go back to you, Chris.
Great, thank you so much, Kara. And why don't we turn our cameras back on? And I would invite folks to ask questions. We don't actually have any at the moment. Folks, it's afternoon, might be the lunch lull. So let me talk quickly about some of the resources these 2 resources that we have here. And if people do have questions or comments, we would welcome either. And please, again, for those of you who may not have heard that at the beginning, the way to do it is in the questions tab. Click on that far right square with the arrow, and that pops it out and allows you to write in a question. But here are 2 things, again, to resources at American Farmland Trust, in addition to Kara, who is now increasing her work in the region and around the West and thinking about resiliency. The Farmland Information Center is a collaboration we have with USDA. It is a wealth of information, not just for landowners, but for policymakers and for folks who want to learn more about tools and techniques of saving farmland. Again, for landowners, there is information about what is an agricultural conservation easement. It is a way to look for land trusts and programs in your neck of the woods. We have a directory of folks who protect land. It also talks about policies and approaches, so tools around planning and zoning, around planning for agriculture, wealth of information about the agricultural conservation easement program. So you see here that there's a phone number. Importantly, it is staffed and folks either answer the phone or they do call you back. And that is an alternative to having to use the internet. And we know that some people appreciate that. So please do use it. They are available and they are there to help answer questions and send people in the right direction. I should also mention there are also a wealth of information about data. If you are looking for data about your county or about Colorado or about the country as a whole, again, they are a wealth of information. And then back just a little pitch again on the National Agricultural Land Network. A network is only as good as the members in it. And we encourage folks to join because, again, we are hoping to build and intending to build the network as a way to learn from each other and what kind of work is happening around the country and the successes and the challenges of particular approaches, again, on saving land. And it's not just around permanent protection, but all kinds of tools. So now that I've riffed for a couple of minutes, we do have a couple of questions. Thank you all. So there is a question about where can we find the guidebook for local governments? Again, go to the Farmland Information Center. If you type in planning for agriculture, I think at the top you will find information about that. Here is a question that is Boulder County was not included in the top 3 despite being in the Front Range urban corridor. Have you all looked at their local policies to use as a model in other communities? I can start off a little bit that we have done a number of case studies about Boulder County. I don't know that any of them are very recent, but we have done some. Again, you can find those on the Farmland Information Center website, but I think we do consider it a model. And if there are folks that have particular ideas or other studies that showcase Boulder, please send them our way. But let me defer also to Kara and to Jordan on that in terms of thoughts about Boulder County.
Let's see. From my perspective, so I actually grew up in Boulder County and live nearby, and our offices are actually located in Broomfield. So a lot of these questions kind of hitting home for me at the moment. But yeah, it is interesting in Boulder County why that's the case, and I think part of it's probably is the land use decisions that have been made over the past 40 to 50 years at this point in terms of putting tax dollars to use in protecting both open space but also private farms and ranches as a buffer to communities there. But then, yeah, looking just down the road next door in Broomfield County, where our offices are located, it's interesting to see that that's a county that's #1 in the country for loss of farmland. And I know it's a unique situation here, but it's also a little bit disheartening.
Right. Yeah. And I do think that Boulder has been an innovator for a long time. And again, it's really a model, not just for the state, but around the country. I think that's it. We do have a comment from someone who just said, who is a developer but has a special interest in preserving agricultural land. It is great to know that we appreciate your appreciation, and just wanted to note that there are folks who can both focus on development and protecting agricultural land. And we hope that more developers can do that, because we all need to be working in this together and find places for development. Again, we understand the need for development, particularly affordable housing. We feel the need for jobs and economic opportunities, but we think that both can coexist. And it's a matter of being smart in how we grow and where we place our development. So thank you for that. Let me, since we have just a minute or two, Jordan, any last thoughts from your end before I hand it over to Kara to close us out?
I just want to thank both of you for putting on this webinar and for inviting me to attend. I think these are very good conversations, and the information that you presented, I think, is very helpful. And again, advancing the conversations around conservation here in Colorado and across the country. And I think it's important work that you all are doing, and it helps inform what we're doing here at the state level. And I'm sure what many of our partners that are listening in on this call are doing. So just want to thank you again.
Great. Thank you for coming. And Kara, you get the last word.
No, it's always so fun. I think the only thing that I would add, Chris, is just encouraging folks to reach out to AFT on, ideas around some of our policy recommendations, or even building out some tools and programming and exploring ideas in Colorado in the future. We started the Resilient Ag West initiative just like 5 months ago, and Colorado has always been very high on the list of states that we were hoping to build partnerships and add value to. And so we will be I'll be sending a follow-up email with resources and links, and including my email. So just encourage you to reach out and really help to educate us on what we don't know about local conditions and things where we might be able to help. And also just thank you again for attending.
Great. Take care, all. Thank you again, Jordan.
Bye-bye.